The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 16th chapter. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. The Gospel of the Lord. Beloved of God, grace to you and peace from the one who created us, redeemed us, and moves among us still. Amen. As of mid-July, more than 650 reported cases of COVID-19, including a number of cases resulting in death, had been linked to churches and religious events across the country. The actual number is likely much higher, given our country's limited capacity for contact tracing, and given the many new coronavirus hotspots that sprung up around the South and parts of the upper Midwest this summer. Grace's Council has shown great love for our congregation in the difficult decisions that they've made to keep our building closed. If you received Council's email on Friday, you know that our congregation won't be gathering for worship in the building this fall either. I'm grateful for Council's wisdom and the decisions that help us care for each other and for our neighbors. But those decisions have challenged me and all of us to consider what it even means to be the church when we can't come together. Christian worship is, by its very nature, a deeply embodied communal experience. We gather in a beautiful space that inspires our worship of the God who first created every good and beautiful thing. We raise our voices in song, and it doesn't matter if we have a classically trained voice or if we can't carry a tune in a bucket, because we're all singing together. Regardless of the quality of our individual song, our voices together mingle and blend with the sound of reverberating hope. A baby shrieks from the baptismal font as she is washed in new life, and an elder in the faith smiles quietly from his wheelchair as he worships from the third row. Together, as a community, we glimpse the beginning of life and its end, all in one short moment. And we give thanks that the setting of the sun is as gorgeous and miraculous as its rising. We come forward to receive bread and wine, a sign of Christ's constant presence with us, and a reminder that there still exist tables from which no one is excluded and from which no one leaves hungry. We hug and shake hands in the fellowship hall after worship, sharing coffee and donuts and the kind of conversation that will buoy us into next week. But then a virus rips through our world, exposing how fragile we really are. The embodied communal nature of our life together suddenly becomes a very real danger to that new baby and to that elder in the faith and to all of us in between. We try to maintain our worship life and our outreach ministries and our ministries of care for one another, but it all feels just a little bit thin compared to what we know and love. Some of us at Grace are actually finding ourselves attending worship more often, with more frequency than we would if we were worshiping in person. But others are feeling some pretty intense grief and even some pretty intense anger. about not being able to gather for worship in our sanctuary. And I get it. Our country and our world are in the midst of an experience of collective trauma. We can't even come together to comfort one another. It's awful. So what does it mean to be the church, people of grace? In a time when coming together as we are accustomed to doing is to risk one another's well-being. Today's reading from the Gospel of Matthew lets us in on a conversation among Jesus and his disciples. Matthew is careful to tell us that the friends had entered the district of Caesarea Philippi because the place is important to the context of the conversation. Caesarea Philippi was a city in which economic strength and idol worship and political power were on grand display, all of the markings of the empire. So it's in the shadow of empire then that Jesus asks a question that would come to define a community of followers spanning thousands of years. Who do people say that I am? Simon Peter gets it right. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Next week, we'll hear that Peter is actually kind of a screw up and that he has no real idea what it means to confess that Jesus is the Messiah. But today, he gets to shine a little bit. God had revealed the truth of Jesus' identity to Peter, whose name means little stone. And Peter's confession that Jesus is the Son of the living God will become the bedrock on which the church is built. And this is the first bit of good news. God built a church on the confessional foundation of a guy who is all zeal and certainty today. But Peter, he's the same guy who nearly drowns himself trying to follow Jesus out onto the water in the middle of a storm. He's also the guy who will pull out a sword later and cut off the ear of a slave, as though he hadn't heard a single word that Jesus had uttered to that point. Peter's the one who, when things get really rough, will publicly deny any association with Jesus in order to save his own skin. And he'll do that not once, not twice, but 3 times. This church that has now been entrusted to us, it's never been made up of anything other than us broken folks. Our grief, our anger, our confusion, our faltering faith, our inability to gather in the spaces that inspire our worship, our distracted watching of worship online, our imperfect celebration of Holy Communion at a distance. None of that is an obstacle for the goodness of God. Not even the gates of Hades are strong enough to prevail against the community of faith that has cast its lot with Jesus, the Son of the living God. And that's the second bit of good news. We follow Jesus, the Messiah. We serve Jesus, the Son of the living God. As much as it wants to suck us in and keep us bound up in its empty promises, we do not serve the things of empire on display in Caesarea Philippi and in our world today. We don't serve money or the cultural idols that cry out for our constant attention, or the political power brokers that hold our collective well-being in the balance. We serve Jesus, who is God's way of coming close to us, close enough that we might understand the bigness of God. We serve Jesus, who reveals to us God's heart. It's a heart that aches with the pain of the world, a heart that loves us beyond our deserving and beyond our wildest imagining, a heart that longs to pull us into the story of possibility, the possibility that an entirely new world order is on our doorstep, the kind of world where compassion envelops every internal demon, the kind of world where limited justice gives way to radical freedom, and where the power of love swallows up even death. We follow Jesus, the Son of the living God. And here's the third bit of good news. We don't follow Jesus on our own power. We can't, just like Peter couldn't. Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah, and that confession is the rock on which the church will be built. But the truth of Jesus' identity doesn't come because Peter is like a star student, like the most apt to earn an A on a messianic quiz. Heaven and earth have not revealed this to you, Jesus says, but my Father in heaven. Revelation, it turns out, comes from God, and only from God. Always. And here's the thing. The same is true of faith. Faith and hope and courage feel in short supply for so many of us right now, but we don't have to muster them on our own. Because God is still at work in us in the same way that God was at work in Peter, instilling in us the gift of faith and also giving us the gift of each other, drawing us together in one body so that we can hold each other up when one of us is faltering. So what does it mean to be the church when we can't even come together? It means what it has always meant. It means allowing God to work through our messy, imperfect lives. It means confessing Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of the living God, whose love sets the whole world free. And it means receiving the gift of faith when it's revealed to us, and leaning on the rest of the church when faith is hard to find. This is a hard season, people of grace. I know it. I feel it. But God is still at work in you and in the world. I see it in you, being the church together. I see it in the notes and phone calls that have taken the place of hospital visits. I see it in the prayer shawls that got sent this week to a family in crisis. I see it in the generosity you display over and over as the donation box outside the church fills up in the midst of the different drives that are set up to support our neighbors in need. I see it in the brave, vulnerable conversations that we are having about race as we seek out ways to participate in the ongoing work of racial justice and equity in this world. And I see it even in your willingness to forego some of the things that we hold most dear, including worshiping in our sanctuary, out of deep love for one another and our neighbors. The transforming power of God's work is still at work, dear friends, in you, in the world, and in the church. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, that can hold back the power of our God. Amen.